And if you're having any technical difficulties, if you would just put that in the chat room, and we hope to clear those up. But my name is Rick Miller. I'm so happy that you've joined us this afternoon. I have exciting information to share with you. I always get excited when I have the opportunity to share our research, our principles, and our practices. I recall a while back that one of my students here at Arizona State University once wrote an evaluation on one of my classes, and he said, "Professor Miller seems to enjoy the class more than the students." I took that as a compliment. I get excited about, again, what we're doing here, what we've discovered, how we've concluded those findings into simple research understandings, and then how we've used those to create a series of principles and practices that we believe can help every child succeed without exception. And we think these are applicable for adults as well. And that's part of the reason we created the Center for the Advanced Study and Practice of Hope. The primary reason being that we think hope is something remarkable that we should study across the lifespan. And even though our initial interest was about kids, the center, as it continues and advances its work, will be looking at hope from a lens of all segments and stages of our life. So look forward to more information coming from the center, and of course, more information coming from Kids at Hope. So again, thank you for joining us. We have people really from around the world. That's exciting. And without further ado, let me share with you some of our discoveries, our conclusions, our principles, and our practices. So I want to begin by introducing our logo. Many of you have seen this before in one shape, form, or another, but I think it deserves some additional explanation because I think our logo tells a story. Most logos are basically signatures of organizations. So if you see a particular logo, you can associate it with Amazon or with Google or with IBM. But I think our logo actually tells a story. And you see the words Kids at Hope, and that pretty much sums up what we're trying to better understand as to why some kids do well and some kids struggle. And we want to understand it from a positive asset lens rather than a deficit or negative lens. So we called our research project Kids at Hope. So that's why it's prominently displayed in the middle of the logo. The logo is then surrounded by a sunburst, the sun representing the symbol of hope. Hope means that the sun will come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that the sun will come up. I know my friends in Seattle and Tacoma and Oregon, when I share this presentation in those states, and I'll tell them that the sun will come out tomorrow, I usually get an applause because we know when the sun does come out, after gloomy days, we have a renewed sense of energy and excitement. We then have the words no exceptions because we believe our world is set with exceptions. But when we believe in all kids and they're all at hope, not at risk, we want to make sure that there are no exceptions to that understanding. If there is one exception, then it's easier to find two and then three, and then we're back to where we started, that some kids will do well and other kids may not. The sunburst is painted in gold to represent two types of young people that we come across. One type comes to us with gifts. Those gifts are easily identified. They're musically gifted, they're socially gifted, academically gifted, athletically gifted. Those kids are fun to teach and coach and mentor and instruct. But there's another population of kids that come to us, and they come to us with treasures. And those treasures are deeply buried. So symbolically, we use the gold color to represent kids who come to us with not gifts, but with treasures. And we use the expression treasure hunting to identify those children that need extra attention from adults who just don't see themselves through their professional title, but equally see themselves through their cultural title. So a professional title may be a teacher, a youth worker, a social worker, a child welfare worker, probation officer, detention officer, school psychologist. Those are all formal professional titles. But equal to that, there has to be a cultural title. And we use the term treasure hunting to remind ourselves we're a social worker and a treasure hunter, a psychologist and a treasure hunter, a youth worker and a treasure hunter, a probation officer and a treasure hunter. And that's true for every adult that goes through life, that they have to see themselves as treasure hunters and create a culture around that understanding. The 3 star kids at the bottom represents the 3 universal truths that I'll be talking about a little bit later. The 1st star kid represents the importance of believing in kids. The 2nd star kid represents the importance of connecting with kids. And the 3rd star kid represents the importance of time traveling with children. And again, I'll explain each of those representations. So you can see the logo tells a story that we see kids at Hope. That's important. We see kids that come to us with gifts and treasures, and we look for the treasures as well as identifying gifts. We don't allow any exceptions to enter the belief system because that rules kids out before we rule them in, and then we focus on 3 universal truths. The magic of all this happens in our believed and practiced formula, that if you believe all kids are capable of success and you practice it, more kids will find themselves growing up to be hopeful. And that means they'll achieve more of their goals, they'll be happier, and they'll be satisfied with the life experience. So first of all, you have to believe it. Second of all, you have to practice it. We know there's a distinction between believing and practicing. Sometimes we believe in things and don't practice them, and sometimes we practice things that we don't believe in. But when you do both together, when you truly believe in something, believe that every child is capable of success, no exceptions, and you practice that belief, then change begins to take place. Transformation begins to take place, and we see a remarkable difference in the kids that we work with. And so that brings us to an interesting question for each of you to answer thoughtfully. And that is, if we had a problem with the spread of the flu virus in any given year in our communities, what could we as a community actually do to prevent the spread of the flu? And usually when I ask this question in workshops and classes, my audience always responds the same way. When I ask them, how should we as a community prevent the spread of the flu? Normally people will say, make sure everyone gets a flu vaccine. Pretty good advice. Number 2, they'll offer, if you're sick, stay home, self-quarantine. We think that's a pretty good strategy. If you're not around infecting people, then other people won't get infected. So that should work fairly well. And wash your hands with fidelity. During the flu season, wash your hands a little bit more intentionally than you may wash your hands when it's not flu season. So we just want people to kind of ramp up their concern about contracting the flu or spreading the flu by using 3 well-known strategies. Get a flu vaccine, stay home if you're sick, and wash your hands with fidelity. If we understand how to prevent the flu, then the next question becomes quite profound, and that is, how do you prevent the spread of hopelessness? And that becomes consequential, because when I ask that question in our workshops, in our classes, in our events, people tend to stare at each other because they don't have as quick an answer as they do when I ask the question about a communicable disease, some like the flu. So they look at each other because we don't have a common understanding. We know that hopelessness is somewhat epidemic. Sometimes we focus on the symptoms of hopelessness, but not the cause of hopelessness. What we believe has to happen is we have to understand the root causes of why some kids grow up to be hopeless, and then what are the symptoms of that hopelessness. Now, we know for a fact that some of those symptoms are depression, could be anxiety, disengagement in school, juvenile delinquency, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, suicide ideation, and in fact, sometimes suicide. These are all symptoms of not having a future worth investing in. When you don't believe you have a future, i.e., when you don't sense you have hope and the ability to achieve your goals in the future and the energy necessary to achieve those goals, when you have that general feeling, then you begin to make bad decisions. and those bad decisions affect your future. So anything that a child does or a person does that offers a consequence to their future, we can relate back to a sense of hopelessness, because why else would you be making poor decisions if in fact you had a future worth investing in and making the effort to achieve that future? So I'm going to come back to this question of how do you prevent hopelessness as I talk about our research conclusions and some of the protocols that we've created or principles that we've created that we think can impact this general sense of hopelessness that again manifests itself into very poor decision making by the people feeling hopeless. They make very bad decisions which affect their future. So with that as background information, let me kind of get into what it was that over a 7-year period from 1993 to 2000 that we began to better understand why some children do well and other children struggle and what we can do about it. So what we did is over those 7 years is we did a wide research review. We looked at most of the human service literature, the studies, the research in human services. That could include psychology, sociology, recreation, education, criminology, medicine. If there was a part of what they were exploring and investigating and examining, we were interested in what they were identifying for those of us that were reviewing those research conclusions, and then taking that into a giant, full, complete understanding to identify what we think would truly change the trajectory of many young people's lives. So here are those consequential conclusions that we identified beginning in 2000 after a 7-year research review. The first one is not risk or trauma that prevents kids from succeeding, it's the absence of hope. Now, let's go back and think about where we were in the 1990s and beginning in the 1980s when we concluded that many of America's children were at risk. And they were at risk for many reasons. Sometimes it could be poverty. Sometimes it could be chronic unemployment of the parents. Sometimes that could include the parents not having an education of any consequence, including maybe not even graduating from high school, or families that were dysfunctional, families that were highly mobile, where there was alcohol abuse in the family, or the use of drugs, or even criminal behavior or domestic violence. Children who came from those circumstances were considered at risk, and therefore we didn't even have to know the children anymore. We just had to know the circumstances and the conditions from where those children came from, and we automatically put an at-risk label on them. So we when looking at the research, we began to understand that it wasn't risk or trauma alone that prevented these kids from succeeding, is that they never discovered this energy force, this dynamic called hope. And so we needed to focus on hope, not just on trauma and risk. We became experts in identifying trauma and risk. We did not become experts in understanding the consequence and the power behind this concept called hope, or this construct called hope. So that became truly consequential. If you take a moment and think that through, you begin to see a paradigm shift almost beginning to emerge in terms of do we use even the label at-risk kids to consequently prophesize their futures as not being as positive as kids who come from less risky or traumatic situations. When we understand it may not be the risk or trauma that prevents their success, is the absence of hope. So that's number one research conclusion. The second one is that we identified was those of us that work with other people's children, and I believe the majority of you on the webinar are of that category. I do know there's a number of parents that have joined us as well, so I thank you for that. So this would be true for the teachers, the social workers, the probation officers, detention officers, police officers, child care workers, anyone, recreation leaders, anyone that works with other people's children, they understand that they don't control the risk that these children bring to them, but that they control the hope that they offer them. So our conclusion was we, those of us that work with other people's children, don't control most of the risk, but we do control much of the hope. That is an empowering conclusion. When we understand that from the inside out, we then take responsibility of helping young people become hopeful, because we can't do anything about whether their parents graduated from high school or not. We can't do anything about whether dad abandoned the family 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. We can't do anything about some of the chronic unemployment that they've experienced, or that mom is on methamphetamines. We can't control much of that. So we shouldn't be so focused on that we lose sight of what we can control, and what we can control is hope. So that becomes the empowering conclusion, that we control hope, we don't control risk. I'm always pleased to say that if Martin Luther King Jr. was alive today, and he would share with us his dream speech, and within that speech he said that one day his 4 little children will be judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. I believe today he would say, don't judge his 4 little children by the risk that they come to us with, but by the hope that we offer them. And I think that becomes an important understanding. The third one always captures my imagination, and that is hope is taught and learned. You learn hope like you learn reading, writing, math, and science. You learn hope like you learn what shoe goes on the right foot, what shoe goes on the left foot. You learn hope like we've all learned that somebody taught us to wipe our bottoms. So we as human beings, we have an enormous amount of capacity, but we have to do a lot of learning throughout the lifespan to be able to navigate and control our lives and the paths that we take. We need help along the way. Nobody pulls themselves up from their own bootstraps. So hope is taught and learned. If we understand the power behind that concept, then it's equal for us to understand this second postscript. And that is that you can't teach that which you don't know. If you yourself aren't a hopeful person, you can't teach a child to become hopeful. If you yourself don't understand how hope is used as a GPS system in your own lives, how do you show that and demonstrate that to a young child? So hope is taught and learned. Those of us that work with other people's children, we ourselves have to be hopeful. We have to understand the elements and dynamics associated with hope. Those of us that hire people to work with other children, we need to hire them for their hopeful skill sets. Normally, when we hire people, we hire them for their credentials, their experience, their qualifications. But usually when we hire people, we don't explore their sense of hopefulness. We can do that. We should do that, and we must do that. So hope is taught and learned. You can't teach that which you don't know. The fourth research conclusion, the last of the 4 major research conclusions, are there other conclusions? Yes, there are other conclusions, but these are the 4 top ones. And that is programs and curriculum alone, underscore the word alone, cannot make a difference. Adults do. So that changes, again, our understanding and comprehension as to what it is that we offer kids to try to make a difference in their lives. And often what we do is we look at programs and curriculum design that if we adopt it and implement it, we should see a difference in children's lives. When we understand it's not the programs or curriculum alone that make the greatest difference, it's the adult relationships that the children strike with adults, that the adults strike with children. So my postscript or subscript on this particular conclusion has always been that we shouldn't continue to look for the right programs or curriculum. We should equally look for the right relationships. What adults connect with which children, what ways, and how does that happen in reverse? We should be spending as much time on designing the relationship as we do in designing the curriculum. And I think that becomes extremely important as a concept. So when you take these 4 research conclusions in their totality, you begin to change a mindset that we've had for many, many years. in this country as to why some children do well and other children struggle. And usually we point to everything else but ourselves. We point to the conditions they come from, family life, community life, socioeconomic life, their academic life. We will identify all the reasons some kids don't do well. And very rarely do we look at ourselves as really the silver bullet, that when kids seem to be around adults who are hopeful adults themselves, who understand that our focus shouldn't just be on the risk or trauma of children, it should be on hope, and we will talk more about that, and that we ourselves have to be practitioners of hope. It has to be part of our skill set, and that we have to not just look for a program or curriculum to make the greatest difference. We have to make sure that we're connecting our young people with adults who truly care about them, who understand these research conclusions, and they manifest them in everything we do. So if those are the research conclusions, then the next question we had, well, what do we do with these? And we began to look deeply into each of those four conclusions. And we said to ourselves, as research conclusion number 4, it's not programs or curriculum alone that make the greatest difference, it's adult relationships. Then if that's the understanding, what we have to kind of begin to focus on is that we shouldn't create another program or curriculum to deliver what it is that we understand are the most important elements in helping children to grow up hopeful. So here's what we began to develop. We began to develop a cultural framework that was based on the theory of hope. And the theory of hope was, again, slow to come to the research table. We've been studying criminology longer than we've been studying hopeology. We've been studying sociology longer than we've been studying hopeology. So we've been looking at a lot of different disciplines, but we never really looked at hope as a scientific discipline. It's only been in the last 3 decades that hope has taken its place at the research table. And I've always had this belief that as I looked into this dynamic personally and professionally, I always felt that if we had the strong enough microscope and we looked at the DNA of hope, we would find a triple helix. Now, we know when Watson and Crick identified the double helix of DNA and how those genes connect with each other to create life, they identified a double helix. I believe our microscope would actually identify a triple helix. So we have a illustration of what that looks like. And within the triple helix, one of those strands would say the word goals, that hope seems to have goals. If you're a hopeful person, you have goals. You're at point A, but you want to be at point B. So point A is where you are, point B becomes the goal, and hopeful people seem to have that understanding. The second strand within our triple helix would symbolize the word pathways. It would define pathways as the path or strategy we use to get from point A to point B, recognizing that it's never a straight line, that sometimes we have to have contingency plans. Sometimes our GPS has to reroute itself. We'll experience barriers and detours and obstacles along the way. So we should have multiple pathways. We should think those things through as we begin to pursue our goals. So if you're a hopeful person, the first 2 things you must have to be considered hopeful, you must have goals and you must have pathways. The third strand in our triple helix has the word agency. We call this agency thinking. In other words, being the agent of your own life, taking responsibility for where you want to be and how you plan to get there. Now, you can get a lot of support in goal development. You can get a lot of support in pathway development, but agency is a thing that you have to bring to the table. Every one of us, including our young people, have to bring agency, becoming the agent of their own life. Another way of looking at the word agency would be the fuel that we put in our gas tank each year to navigate through the challenges and opportunities that life presents to us. So agency is the motivation, it's the energy, it's the oomph in how we're trying to pursue our goals. This gives us a really clear understanding as to who are the hopeful people in our lives and whether or not we can be defined as a hopeful person. And to meet this definition, this scientific definition, I'll offer a couple others, but to meet this particular scientific definition, that you have to be able to identify your goals, your pathways, and your agency. If you can't do that, you may be something else, but you're not hopeful. You may be optimistic, which is kind of a passive view of the world. You may have a sense of self-efficacy, that you can do well in things, but you don't use that self-efficacy to actually accomplish anything. It's when these three interwoven strands come into focus, goals, pathways, and agency, is when we know we have a hopeful person. And it's through that lens that we can have a better understanding of how we can help people become hopeful by supporting their goals, helping them identify their multiple pathways, and reminding them that they can put gas in their own gas tank. Because once you put gas in your gas tank and you get up in the morning to drive your personal car to whatever direction you're going, once you do that, that gas can be used to go forward towards your goals, can be used to go backwards away from your goals, or in many cases, if you don't have agency, that car is just going to idle in place. So that's what the agency piece of it is all about. So here's Kids at Hope's definition. The one I just shared with you about goals, pathways, and agencies, you'll find in the work of C.R. Snyder, Rick Snyder, who really was a scientist from the University of Kansas that began to illuminate the scientific understanding of hope through his presentation of goals, pathways, and agencies. We've taken Rick Snyder's work and expanded it. And so here's how we now see hope from our microscope here at the Center for the Advanced Study and Practice of Hope, as well as Kids at Hope's own initiative. That hope is the ability to visit your future. Those are your goals. Well, we wanted to better understand that wasn't fully described to us in our literature review is when we use the word future, what are we actually talking about? So Kids at Hope has added 4 domains, what we call destinations, to begin to help kids and adults actually focus on when we say future, what are we talking about? And we include the domain of home and family, education and career, community and service, hobbies and recreation. 4 separate expressions of where life's journey will take you. Often we have reduced the understanding of future to what do you want to be when you grow up? It's almost like future has been consumed by the idea of career and college readiness, when we, those of us that work with children, know that future is much more than just education and a career. It includes our home and family. It includes our community and its service to the community, and includes our hobbies and recreation. So when we talk to kids about hope, we're actually helping them explore those 4 destinations, those 4 domains. So it's the ability to visit that future, defined as home and family, education and career, community and service, hobbies and recreation, and then return to the present and prepare yourself for the journey. So if you look at the first part of that, the ability to visit your future, what that future looks like in those 4 domains, return to the present, you have the first half of that, you have the goals. The second half of that, you begin to create the pathways, and preparing yourself for the journey includes putting gas in your own gas tank. So that becomes our definition of hope. Another one I want to share with you, I don't have a slide on, but I think it's profound. And that is from a colleague who is unfortunately passed at a very young age, who worked alongside of Rick Snyder. When Dr. Snyder passed, Shane Lopez, one of his students, took the mantle and began his own exploration into the science of hope. And Shane had a beautiful expression of his definition of hope, articulated as hope is knowing that the future will be better than the present and that you have the power to make it so. That the future will be better than the present and you have the power to make it so. That's quite a remarkable statement about hope, because that's different from optimism. Optimism expects things to get better with or without your involvement. But hope requires you to be active in your own life, requires you to come up with pathways to identify your goals. You can't be just optimistic, that you have to include hope. And it's equally much different than the word resilient, because resilient is the ability to bounce back from adversity. But hope is what you introduce after you become resilient to create other pathways that may have been obstructed from the difficulty or the adversity. Come up with those pathways, the agency, and then you're on to a hopeful life. Much different than resiliency alone, much different than optimism alone, much different than self-efficacy, just having the skill sets and then nothing in place to use those skill sets doesn't make you a hopeful person. We know lots of people who have great skills who are not hopeful. So it's different than self-efficacy, optimism, and the other one, I just lost my train of thought. So that's our definition of hope. That's C.R. Snyder's definition of hope: goals, pathways, and agency. And it's Shane Lopez's definition of hope, that hope is knowing that the future will be better than the present, and you have the power to make it so. So I want to take you to what it was that Kids at Hope begins to advance in terms of our principles associated with those 4 research conclusions. The first one, we begin to understand of how do you promote hope in young people. The first and simplest way and most powerful way is you believe in them. We are the first organization, the first research team to actually look at the word believe and give it a framework in which to basically say with great intensity that kids who are believed in do better than kids who aren't. In other words, kids do better when you believe in them. They do less better than when you don't believe in them. Once we understand that construct, then we have a binary choice. If we want kids to be hopeful, we believe in them. If we don't want them to be hopeful, we don't believe in them. So when it becomes that simple as an understanding, why wouldn't we believe in kids? And unfortunately, the feedback we get from people who don't believe all kids are capable of success is something like this: I'll see it when I'll believe it when I see it. Where the other people that actually understand the power behind believing in kids say, I know I have to believe it before I see it. 2 different types of people. You have to decide what type of person you want to be. This would be similar to washing your hands prevents the spread of disease. Not washing your hands may promote the spread of disease. That's a binary choice. Now that you know that construct, now you decide whether you want to prevent the spread of disease or you may advance the spread of disease simply by making the decision whether you want to wash your hands with fidelity or not. If you want kids to be hopeful, you choose to believe in them. Which kids do you believe in? You believe in all kids without exception. Why do you believe in all kids? Because it's not the risk that prevents kids from success, it's the absence of hope. One of the ways that can promote hope in children is to believe in them regardless of the circumstances from which they come to us. The second one is the connect. The connect is that kids do better when they have meaningful, sustainable relationships with caring adults. Kids do less better when they don't have those types of meaningful, sustainable relationships. That becomes consequential. If we know that's the binary choice, if we know kids do better when we connect with them, they do less better than when we don't connect with them, then the choice is that we should connect with them. And we need to measure that. We need to monitor that. We need to track that. But we don't. We assume that if you put a bunch of kids together with a bunch of adults, like in a schoolhouse or a youth serving organization, that these connections should automatically take place. But what happens in those relationships, that a service relationship takes place. Someone's delivering a service to a kid. We're not talking about the delivery of a service, a lesson plan, a behavioral plan, a social emotional learning plan. We're talking about simply the power behind an adult having a unique, powerful, meaningful relationship with another human being. in this case, a young person who definitely needs that to support their journey to become hopeful young people and therefore hopeful adults. There you again, you have that binary choice. Our suggestion, choose to connect, monitor it, track it, measure it, and we have ways to do that now. The third universal truth is that children and adults succeed when they have a sense of their future in more than one destination. That the sense of happiness and fulfillment and life satisfaction seems to be achieved when you can achieve goals in life, when you're dynamic, not stagnant. And therefore, the brain has this ability, unlike any other species on the face of the earth, to exercise this process called mental time travel. Mental time travel, our synonym for the word hope. When you can mentally time travel to your future, when you can mentally time travel and see goals ahead of you, when you can mentally time travel and come up with pathways before you even pursue those goals, when you can mentally time travel and understand the investment you have to make personally in terms of becoming the agent of your life, when you have your goals, your pathways, and your agency and use them to time travel, the only species that has a way to articulate that and has the architecture and geography of the brain to, in fact, make sure that that process is triggered, then you become a hopeful person. So how do we promote hope? How do we help kids become hopeful? We understand that we control the hope. We don't control the risk. We know that it's not risk that or trauma that prevents kids from success. It's the absence of hope. We know that we can teach hope, and we know that it's not programs or curriculum that alone that makes the greatest difference. It's when we create those relationships. We manifest that in three different ways at the very basic building block level. We manifest that by first and foremost believing in our kids. Which kids? All kids. How many exceptions? No exceptions. We manifest it by connecting with kids. Which kids? All kids. No exceptions. We monitor that. We measure that. We track that. And number three, we teach kids how to time travel by teaching them how to use goals, pathways, and agency to navigate their life. You can see this isn't complicated, but this is relationship. We try to look for the objective part of this, a system part of this, but this is about human relationship. This is about adults connecting with kids in meaningful ways. So if we take all that we've learned thus far and we ask the question again, how do we prevent hopelessness? And we understand what our research conclusions reveal to us, how we translated those into three universal truth, three primary principles. Then we created this simulated newscast to say, what can we as a community do to prevent a sense of hopelessness? And I think you'll get a kick out of how this actually plays itself out.
There is an epidemic of hopelessness spreading across the country. Many young people have lost hope in their future. You see it in depression, drug abuse, anxiety, lack of interest in school, juvenile delinquency, and tragically, suicide. When you give up on your future, you make very bad decisions. So how do we prevent hopelessness? Is there a vaccine? Kids at Hope, a national youth development organization that has been studying hope and hopelessness for 27 years, believes there is and is launching a campaign to ensure every young person is offered the opportunity to be hopeful. According to Kids at Hope founder Rick Miller, who is also a professor of practice at Arizona State University's Center for the Advanced Study and Practice of Hope, hope begins by ensuring adults are committed to believing in kids, are connected to them in meaningful ways that are sustained, and are able to teach children how to mentally time travel, a process that activates the brain to be hopeful by imagining their future and creating pathways and energy to achieve their goals. Kids at Hope, along with local and national partner organizations, are launching The Commitment, a public service health campaign to remind adults to ensure every young person knows we believe, we connect, and we are willing to time travel with them as three major building blocks to create and advance hope. To learn more about The Commitment, to reach every young person with a message and practice that supports their sense of hope, contact www.kidsathope.org.
So what we tried to do there was to see how we can couch what we've learned, how we've translated those into simple principles and powerful practices, to see if we can actually create a public health awareness campaign similar to how to prevent the spread of the flu virus by getting a flu vaccine, staying home if you're sick, quarantining yourself, and washing your hands with fidelity. If we understand that in preventing the spread of the flu or other viruses, how do we prevent hopelessness? And I hope I made a pretty compelling case that the way we do that is that we create communities, organizations, agencies, programs, departments, wherever adults connect with kids, and that's throughout our communities and with the institutions that serve those kids. The three basic building blocks that we have to ensure guarantee that every kid is going to get from adults that serve them. The basic building blocks of that is we got to believe in those kids, all of them. We got to connect with them, all of them. And we got to teach them to time travel, all of them. It's that simple but powerful those constructs that will make a difference in all kids' lives with no exceptions. How do we know that? I think intuitively, we as human beings understand things that science doesn't have to prove to us, but equal to it, we now have the science behind us. So we have the best of all worlds. We know from the human understanding of why some people do better than other people. Those who seem to be hopeful do better than those who seem to be hopeless. When we begin to understand what hopeful people have that hopeless people don't have, we begin to understand they have goals, they have pathways, they have agency, and we begin to fully recognize that one of the ways they got those goals, pathways, and agency is they found people who believed in them, connected with them, and time traveled with them. If you're interested in learning more about The Commitment, what are we committing to? We're committing to ensuring that every kid grows up to be hopeful, that we're making a personal, hopefully an organizational, hopefully a community commitment to that. Certainly write to me. We're trying to develop a critical mass of organizations and people who see the power behind this collective impact, that the more of us that understand this, the more of us that advance it, that promote it, the more kids will benefit from it. So this can't be a one agency effort. This has to really be a community effort similar to preventing the spread of the flu virus that we, if we get our act together, can certainly prevent the spread of hopelessness. If you want to reach me, and I hope you do, I would love to continue this conversation. If you'd like to reach me, you can reach me at rickmiller@asu.edu. You can reach me at rick@kidsathope.org. So you have two different emails. They both come to the same mailbox. Certainly visit our website. We have a very robust and dynamic website at kidsathope.org. And you can see at the bottom of this a longer web address for our center here at Arizona State University. All you have to do is Google the Center for the Advanced Study and Practice of Hope, and you go to that website. So continue the conversation. My phone number, and I thought it was on the slide, but it didn't show up. My phone number is 602-674-0026, 602-674-0026, Rick@kidsathope or rickmiller@asu.edu. Let's continue the conversation. Share with me your thoughts, your interests, your questions, your challenges. And then we have some upcoming webinars, and I'll kind of get to that. I'm going to ask my staff here at the center if there were any questions that came up. We were to have a moderator that I'm not sure if she's on yet.
Yes,
but
I am, Rick.
You are on.
Great. I am, yes. And
okay,
so I have a couple of questions for you.
So thank you for joining us. I know you had some internet problems on the front end, but I'm happy you're here to support this effort.
And it was an incredible introduction on your part, so I think it worked out perfectly. We'll start with Dennis, and he's right here from Mesa, Arizona. And his question, Rick, is, can you paint a picture of how this amazing work is or has cultivating hopefulness in lives?
Yes. So we've had about 9 different research studies done around Kids at Hope. We know that kids who benefit from believing, connecting, time traveling actually end up with more goals. They tend to be more engaged in school, and then they tend to have better relationships with the adults in those schools. And the disciplinary, one of the first things we begin to see is disciplinary rates fall dramatically in schools and organizations that adopt Kids at Hope. So we now know with the 20 years that we've been practicing Kids at Hope, we've seen remarkable changes in young people who come from challenging circumstances, but young people in general. They don't have to be at-risk kids. I think all of us, whether we come from socially economic supportive demographics or those who are challenged, can always benefit from believing, connecting, time traveling. I should offer really quickly that there was one school we studied that went from the 28th worst performing school in a school district of 28 schools. When they interviewed the incoming principal of the school before adopting Kids Hope, they identified the school as the armpit of the school district. He took on Kids at Hope amongst a number of other initiatives, but Kids at Hope was his cultural framework. Everything was based around the Believe, Connect, time travel. And in 5 years, this school went from the 28th worst performing school to the top performing school in a 5-year period. How did that happen? Has to be the question. How do those types of achievement take place? And when you analyze it, when we look at it, it changed the culture. The school changed the culture from not believing in all kids to believing in all kids, and ensuring that those 3 principles, Believe, Connect, Time Travel, were actually woven into everything they did at that school.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. And then we have a second question. But before I get to that, I just want to thank you guys so much for all your positive comments. Rick is unable to see them, but he will see them. So thank you for all your support. Our second question, Rick, is from Heather Hada, right here from Scottsdale, Arizona. And her question is, when we address students that need ACEs on campus, do you have a team that monitors or manages the connections?
Well, that's a great question, and obviously she has a little bit more information about Kids Hope than I was able to cover in this webinar, because she uses the term ACEs, which is our metaphor for different types of relationships that different adults can strike with different children. So that's a whole webinar in itself, but I like hearing the expression ACEs because it defines the different types of relationships. The best way, once you begin to identify what ACE you offer to children, we have a system here that we can actually track those ACEs. So we want to, again, as I said earlier in the webinar, we want to measure, we want to track, we want to measure and we want to track which kids are connected so that we ensure that all kids are connected. You have to measure that and you have to track that. So we have a system that in fact does it. It happens on the adult side. We're working on a system that equally supports the youth side. So it's called ACEs tracking, pretty simple. On the youth side, it's going to be called My ACEs. Who do the young people identify as giving them ACEs? And then the current system is identifying the adults who say, I'm giving ACEs to these kids. What we have learned in terms of the typical schools that we've studied is about 20 to 30% of kids can be enrolled in your school, receive a lesson plan, are tested, go through the food service line, go through the media center, get homework, but they never have a meaningful relationship with a caring adult. we're delivering services, but we're not creating a relationship. About 20 to 30% of children in schools represent that particular category.
Awesome. Okay. If anybody would like to, there is another question, Rick, that just came through. Let me see. ACEs tracking. Okay. So Heather has got that. And the other question is, a lot of people asking about this webinar and they would like to share it with others. Absolutely. So after this webinar, you can expect to get a recording soon, probably definitely within the next 24 hours. And so you can share that, forward that to whomever you'd like. And we also want to, as Rick mentioned, promote the next 2 upcoming seminars, Culture versus Bureaucracy. And that is on November 20th with our very own Wendy Larson as the presenter. And then also, Are You a True Believer? That one is on Wednesday, January 8th. So that starts out our new year in 2020. Both are at 1:30 p.m. and that is Mountain Time, Arizona. And so, and also I want to let everyone know those who registered came from as far away as Greenland, India, Canada, and the US. So awesome. Any other questions so far other than the thank yous that we all need to give you? I want to recognize Jacinta. She said, Rick, she's from India. And she said, let me see let me go ahead and open this up so I can see it better. Okay. Well, let me go to Joanna. Actually, she asked, how much is the Master Annual Conference?
Okay. Well, let me respond to Jacinta because I'm thrilled that she's on the webinar. It's 3:30 in the morning where she lives. So for her to get up and join us at 3:30 in the morning live, I think shows that it's all about commitment. And so I tip my hat to her. The question about the masters, would you share that one more time?
Absolutely. And then, so Jacinta basically said, where am I? Sorry, guys. She said, Rick, it keeps moving up every time someone sends a text, so I lose my place. But okay, she says, Rick, this offers a powerful framework as we begin this work in India. Thank you for that.
Well, thank her again for her leadership and her commitment. She changed careers to jump in with both feet to make a difference in many of the women who are struggling in that country. And we have to compliment her for taking that path.
Thank you for being such a great example, Jacinta. And then there was a question about the Masters Annual Conference and the cost.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So first of all, before I give you cost, I have to tell you that there's nothing like the Masters. It's an intellectual and spiritual journey into all that we've talked about because it explores the culture, the principles and practices in a way we can't do it via a webinar or the way we can't do it even in our workshops and classes. You get the best researchers and practitioners from around the world attending, and you just have a different level of experience. So I'm really high on the Masters, and this is our 15th annual. So don't miss the Masters. There's nothing quite like it. The tuition cost for the Masters is $1,500 for the entire week. There are some seminar days. It'll be available on our website shortly. But what you need to know is that if you're committed to attending the Masters, we will find a way to get you there. We'll stretch resources on your end. We'll stretch resources on our end. We don't want anyone to be denied the experience of the Masters because of just cost. So we'll work with you if cost becomes a challenge. We think $1,500 is a reasonable cost to begin with, considering the level of speakers that we bring and the intensity of the experience itself. But if it is an obstacle, if it is challenging, we will definitely work. Nobody should be denied the opportunity to experience the Masters.
Okay, wonderful. And a shout out to you, Rick, from Katharina from Brooklyn, New York. And so she just wanted to let you know that Brooklyn, New York is represented here.
and shout back to them as well. I look forward to visiting them soon.
Awesome. There was a comment by Bill Denny. He says, recently, many schools in Illinois are learning about the adverse childhood experiences. And this is what they think about when they hear ACEs and learning about trauma. I have been referring to the Kids at Hope ACEs as the positive ACEs. I'm hoping that this makes sense.
Yes, we do too. Their ACEs is an acronym. Our ACEs is a metaphor, right? So we hope we think people can distinguish between the two. Again, ACEs as adverse childhood experiences, and our ACE as a metaphor to defining the 4 best cards life can deal you in life, which would be the Ace of Clubs, Ace of Hearts, Ace of Spades, and Ace of Diamonds. Each of those are symbolically represented by a different type of relationship between adults and kids. So we hope that Bill continues to understand the difference and advances that difference. Most people can. We work with a lot of organizations that understand the importance of understanding adverse childhood experiences, but not in the absence of understanding the power of hope. And again, as I said at the beginning of the webinar, we become experts in hope and trauma. We have to equally become experts. We become experts in risk and trauma. We equally have to become experts in hope.
Awesome. Okay. And Bill says, thank you, Rick. I appreciate the difference between the acronym and the powerful metaphor. So
yay, good for him. Yay, Bill.
Okay. And then Nastasha asks, hi, is there any way we could get a preview of what ACE tracking looks like? We have using different ways to track ACEs in our school.
Yeah, Natasha knows this well. She knows that whenever Natasha says jump, we always ask how high. So Natasha will put Kim in touch with you. She'll send you out and to anybody else that's interested, a dummy ability to see what ACEs look like, and that you get to practice it a little bit and see how it works, and hopefully you'll adopt it. If you understand the importance of relationships, you understand the importance of ACEs tracking.
Wonderful. And Nastasha also commented, the Masters is life-changing. It changed me and made me a better teacher. Emoji.
Yeah, and having Natasha and some of her colleagues and others attend the Masters, it's that mutual feeling. Everybody brings their energy to the Masters, and everyone plays off of everybody else's energy, and it really is truly a spiritual and intellectual experience.
And Lorenda Southern says, we are using Kids of Hope in 8 rural schools in Alberta, Canada. All staff are being trained in it.
Yeah, I was just up in Alberta and Hannah and the Prairie Land region. I don't know if she's part of that Prairie Land region. My guess is she is. And I am tickled. We had a very strong response from that audience of educators and people who work in the human services, including the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So if we say it takes a village to raise an educated child. The question is, who are the villagers? And the answer is, we're all villagers.
Okay, and Lorenda Southern did reply, Rick, I am.
Yay, good for her.
Okay, and Rick, some shout outs. Karen from Pinal County is looking forward to your visit next week.
Yes, I get to visit Pinal County. That's in Arizona, and they're celebrating Kids Hope Week, day, month, and I want to be part of it. And they were kind in extending an invitation for me to join them for some of those festivities. So thank you.
And we have 1 minute left. And Doré from Canada just wanted to give a shout out representing Canada.
Well, Doré is kind of the part of the spirit that brought Kids at Hope to Canada and helped coordinate my most recent visit. And I want to thank the superintendent there, Cam, and Misty Griffith, as well as Doré and her staff, Becky Vista, for again, a tremendous relaunch of Kids Hope in that Prairie Land region. Just a wonderful experience.
Okay, perfectly. It just counted down to 2:30, so we are done, Rick. Any last minute thoughts?
Well, again, I want to thank everybody. This is a continuing relationship between our work and your work. The more of us that do this together, the stronger we are. This is the movement. It's consequential to the future of every young person, and it's equally consequential to all of us who are the adults. If we're hopeful people, our bottom line is always, you can't have a kid at hope until you first have an adult at hope. So we have to be time travelers. We have to believe in each other. We have to connect with each other. We have to find the humanity that is unique to our species, and we have to manifest that in this dynamic we call hope. And for those of you that joined us today and our voices in the areas that you come from, thank you very much. Stay close. Email us. Talk to us. We look forward to our ongoing conversation.